Today we are talking about a movie that I think even Stephen King fans probably don't know about. No. A movie that even a lot of Mick Garris fans might not know about. Because of its troubled production, its troubled release, and a whole bunch of stuff in between. We're talking about a very personal film to the director, while also being a direct departure from the original writer's work. It's Riding the Bullet.
I just want to show that, this is his copy.
Actual movie.
And then not only the movie, but there's a lot of entanglement about the book, actually, too. It has its own history, too.
The world behind this story is just as interesting as what's on screen. We'll talk about this personal story today. Yeah. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
I should get out of the way. I did really break my hand. So I did break my hand. Hi, I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast. Thanks for watching. Thanks for following us. And for our loyal fans, thank you for continuing to support the show. Heck yeah, we have a Patreon. Check that out for some great deals and great content. We talk about Brian De Palma films on there, exclusively for Patreon members. Mm-hmm. If you're a Patreon, you get an opportunity to tell us what movies we could do review on the future, as well as a shout out. Yeah, that'd be a great deal.
Coming soon on our Patreon. Nick and I are going to talk our favorite vampire movies, so join us over there as well for a fun discussion.
Right, yeah. Also, Nick, Kyle, and I are members of the Minnesota Film Critics Alliance. Check that webpage for critics' reviews as well as ours. And go ahead, do a solid for us. Hit a like and subscribe. Tell your friends about the show. We would love to hit 400 subscribers. And, of course, keep the conversation going. Put a comment down below so we know who you are and we can keep talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So today we're talking about, again, a very, very... shocking. Disappeared movie.
Well, it disappeared, but shocking. Stephen King. This guy's a Stephen King fan if I've ever seen one.
Yeah. Riding the Bullet.
Yeah.
When Alan Parker learns that his mother is gravely ill, he decides to hitchhike his way from college to the hospital to be by her side. Along the way, he is picked up by numerous sketchy folk, including one stranger who gives him a horrifying choice. It kind of breaks down like this. It's the first ebook sold by a major published author.
Yeah.
Because, of course, this was where smaller authors, people are trying to get a name for themselves, were making it known.
So this is like 2000. It's like 2000, which this is kind of unknown. This is kind of like New Frontier territory.
Yep, and it was also one of the first things King wrote after his infamous automobile accident where he was hit by a car. I remember being a kid when he was hit and realizing, wait, this guy's going to die? As a, 9-10-year-old, I was like, this guy's going to die that I've just fallen in love with,
I know. I had a film history class, and somebody announced that he got hit by a car, and we're like, and?
Yeah, and we're all waiting patiently.
Don't do a Stephen King story for us about Stephen.
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
This is not a chapter end, Right. And I think there was this whole question of, is King going to return to writing? Because he had talked about contemplating not going any further, and that was even one of the reasons why he finished writing the last 3 of his Dark Tower series so quickly after the accident, because he thought that there was a chance I might just be done after this. I'm even wearing my Dark Tower shirt today in honor of that.
And I think he really loved to do the Dark Tower series. There's always back in his brain, even as a kid, to do kind of like that story. And if he was done with that story, he thought maybe that he was done writing forever.
Yep. Yeah. And in fact, I think a lot of people thought of him as kind of the George R. R. Martin of a few decades ago, where every time a book was out, it was we're going to have to wait 10 more years for another one. So I think it was surprising to have those last 3 come out in such quick succession. And that's also probably why he kept returning to the Dark Tower. He wrote an 8th book a few years back too, which is set in the middle of that. So, Riding the Bullet came out during that time period then of, is this going to be the last moment we get? Yeah. And it was eventually collected. I think it was in Everything's Eventual. I know I've read it in one of his other collections. It was eventually collected into a wider book. Yeah,
because that's kind of like a mesh.
Yeah, and that was a combination of a number of other things as well. And he had done a lot of these kinds of experimental things with writing stories. Like he wrote this one called The Plant, which was going to be a chapter released at a time on his website. And it was sad because it was an abandoned story. He left it off about 3/4 of the way through. I still want to know how The Plant ends.
Back when we did message boards on the internet, right?
Yeah. He was very experimental. In the 90s, he wrote The Green Mile as 6 different chapbooks that were each 100 pages long, and he released them 1 month after the other in honor of those classic stories. So he was always experimenting with that kind of a form. And then you have Mick Garris, who got his start basically working in the Star Wars offices. He was hired by Lucasfilm just a few months after Star Wars had come out, and his first job was to answer the phones and say, Star Wars, what can I do for you? He also got to operate R2-D2 at the Academy Awards when he showed up there. So Mick Garris's time in Hollywood stretches way back to that kind of a seminal moment.
He kind of didn't go to film school. He just went to film
Yeah.
and learned.
Yeah, he kind of equated it to falling a little bit ass backwards into luck because he ended up working with people that just blew up. They were just in the process of exploding.
Yeah.
He ended up getting a job working on Amazing Stories, produced by Steven Spielberg. So he said it was really great being able to write stuff that Martin Scorsese and Joe Dante and Steven Spielberg were directing, like as some of your first work that you're doing, which springboarded him into basically doing something that he's come to say is what's that?
Friday the 13th, right?
No. He'd gotten his big jump from there into horror sequels. So he had done Critters 2, which is my favorite Critters movie. He'd written The Fly 2, which is actually pretty underrated.
The one with Eric Stoltz?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The finished version is not his version. He kind of doesn't like what it ended up being, but his idea was really cool, and it's still in there. He wrote Psycho 4, which, again, the Psycho sequels, while not being as good as the original, each one of them has something that's kind of cool about them as well, and they are not bad horror sequels.
Hey, 3, after he's like, enough, I'm just going to go rampage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Psycho 4, the beginning, is a really unique and interesting one that actually was a television movie.
I thought for sure he directed a one Friday the 13th.
Not the Friday the 13th movies. He may have done one of the shows. He may have done one of the episodes of the show. I haven't watched all the show recently, but basically kind of from there, got a job working on Stephen King's Sleepwalkers, which was an original horror screenplay Stephen King had written. The original director had been let go. Mick Garris was brought in.
It's very much not taken serious.
No, it's a really fun and freaking weird movie.
I know
that
a
we're
lot of
definitely
people who are
gonna talk
Stephen
about
King
one.
fans understand the flavor of a Stephen King not taking himself serious.
Yep.
And this one is.
The film is known for a person being killed with a carrot. And from there, kind of was able to start his relationship with Stephen King. He directed, I think, the greatest miniseries of all time, The Stand. He also did a more faithful adaptation of The Shining, as well as numerous other adaptations of King's work. They worked really well together in that he was able to kind of get King's ideas from the page to the screen in a way that not many directors had done. Riding the Bullet was kind of unique in that Mick Garris asked him if he could adapt it. He asked him if he could take this story and make it his own.
Yeah, doing my research, I think this all started because Mick kind of wrote a spec. I don't know if you know writing, but a spec is just like almost not really the full-fledged script, but just kind of like what you're going to do.
Yeah. And it's usually done without money, without monetary compensation.
So it's not a script,
like
but you're really much writing down, okay, Act 1 is going to be this, Act 2 is going to be this, and then the third act is going to be kind of like this.
Yeah. And so he got this chance to basically ask his friend now, can I make this movie? And the reason what it boils down to is Mick Garris has a very kind of sad past. He lost a parent and a sibling within a few months of each other. He had a brother who passed away of AIDS. And kind of during this time period was really reckoning with that kind of sadness of your past. And I think you can see that in this film with the main character, Alan Parker, played by Jonathan Jackson, reckoning with the potentially loss of his mother, the only person in his life, really.
Yeah, it's one of those things that a lot of people get attached to horrors, not so much as we like to watch people get eviscerated, but it's also kind of therapeutic.
Yeah.
You exercise a lot of things that are traumatic.
And I think that's the thing is when people invented the term elevated horror to talk about movies that were horror movies that also dived into other like deeper aspects, horror's been doing that for decades. It's just those people weren't watching horror during that time and didn't care. You know?
Check out The Innocents. That's a big production, but it's probably regarded now as elevated, classy horror.
Yeah, I mean, we covered so many slashers from the 80s where they were about other things that just happened to be slashers as well. Horror's always been that progenitor of deep conversation, and I think you can see a lot of that in this film because I think what the film is technically saying is it's talking a lot about how we remember these weird specific moments from our past. Like in the case of Alan Parker's, he's remembered not being able to ride the bullet, not being able to get on this thing. The like most painful memory of being with his mother was that. And I think about that too in my life where, you know, when my grandfather passed away, the one thing that my mind always goes to is the last time I saw him and he didn't remember who I was. You know, I was the youngest grandson, so he didn't remember who I was. I hadn't seen him much recently. And that breaks my heart when I think about it. But it's also, I have all these great memories of my grandfather. Why does my mind go to that one? You know?
I like when Stephen King, I don't know if it's where he's at best at, but I like when he incorporates kind of your childhood back to it.
Yep.
He does that with, you know, Stand By Me, which is body.
Yeah.
He also does it with a little bit, very much like It, because It is, the first book is all when they were kids. Mm-hmm. But here, this is all about my mom. But I want to be an individual when I go back. I want to do my own life. But don't forget, your mom's back there.
Yeah.
It's almost like he wants this character, and I'm going to talk about in my review. King does a lot. Going forward, but what you lose when you go back. When you're going forward, you always have to lose something when you go back.
Yeah, and I think the idea that our past is always changing because of our perception of it.
Yeah, perception of it. Yeah. So this is a novel. I think King is a fast writer. I don't know if he self-edits, but he actually just puts it on paper. I think he just gets it out. It's almost like not really a work, but also just let it flush. It's just like a flushing system to it.
Yeah.
And you see a lot of this in his story, just kind of like a flushing system.
Yeah. He's often spoken about how he writes 2,000 words a day before he's allowed to leave the room. And I've tried doing that. It's very, very hard to get that far, especially with the time, but he has the time. And I think that's where the conversation between him and Garris really comes down to that, is that King, when you read the novella, you can see a lot of King's classic ideas of the past. Yeah. And when you see the movie, you can see a lot of what Garris put on that. And I think, again, the symbiosis between these two storytellers is very fascinating because it makes a film that doesn't really stand within King's world.
All right. So up next is kind of this is my first time seeing it and first time ever hearing about it. It's our review of Riding the Bullet. I see a lot of influence, if you haven't read the first book of Dark Tower, The Gunslinger, which the entire book is him, a destination. Yep. He's got to go, and then and somebody's following him behind him. He doesn't really know what the monster is or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
It's the hero's journey. He's chasing the man in black. He's also got things in his past that are catching up to him.
Right.
I mean, it's very much, this is a 1960s changed version.
It's kind of weird that I saw a lot more influences of that book than anything else. Because it's almost like you're going forward. You're going to college. You want to be your own person, but you also don't want to forget that there's your past history. But there's also an acknowledgement that you have to go there. He's so much forward thinking that he doesn't have a vehicle to get back.
Yeah,
and then when he gets back, he has to use hitchhiking any means necessary to get back to his mom, and he doesn't know if she's going to be back. And then he's flashbacking to all those events that happened to his mom, happy, sad, or not, and then have to face his traumatic, the trauma, the dangers of, the roller coaster ride is kind of a metaphor of you're going to have to, like life, you're just going to have to ride the bullet, no matter where it's going.
Yeah,
so it's almost like a metaphor.
Forward, and there's no way that you can't stop, you can't get off. You get to the end of the ride, and then you leave. And I think that's the question that he's being, Sophie's choice throughout the film is can you live with making that decision? Can you live with having that choice? And is it your choice to make?
Right. It's almost like you're forcing you to go out and live your life, whether your mom is going to pass away or not. Obviously, if she's going to be you want to care for your mom. Everybody does.
Yeah.
But also, you have to understand the life journey. That it's not safe. And obviously, I don't recommend hitchhiking, but you also have to take risks of like, all right, I got to get to this destination. So it's all these little risks, but also you have to go through the crucible to understand you have to live life and it's dangerous. And I think it's a very fitting story for him actually being hit by a car.
Yeah. You can see in so much of the just right after car accident, Stephen King is so can't get his head away from that car accident, which I understand. But you see it in things like Dreamcatcher, where one of the main four characters gets hit by a car and almost dies in the first 100 pages of that 700-page book, and it's something that carries with him. You see it in his adaptation of Kingdom Hospital, which was a one-season television series he done at ABC.
Yeah, it wasn't a book. It was his television series.
Yeah, and I love that series. I think it was so cool. But that first episode of that, there was a writer who gets hit by a car because of some idiot who's not paying attention to the road. It got to the point where King actually bought at auction that van that hit him and destroyed it. Yeah. It was part of who he was like, and it will forever be intrinsically linked to him. And you can see a lot of the way in which he views cars and car accidents and those kinds of things right in Riding the Bullet. He can't get off that subject. He's stuck with it. He's reckoning with it in much the same way that Garris emotionally is reckoning with the loss of these family members, and how Alan Parker is reckoning with the potential loss of the only person that tethers him to his past.
Yeah. You have a very much, I did actually read the book. It's very much, the movie takes place in the 60s. The book doesn't.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird because you would never really hitchhike in the 90s and 2000s. You would just kind of...
It does seem more fitting in the film that it's in the 60s.
Yeah.
And again, that goes back to Garris's time of youth, his growing up during the 60s. So he links it to that time period. Again, I think it's actually a strong adaptational choice. It doesn't bother me that the book was in the 90s.
No.
But it helps, I think, that it was in the 60s for the film.
But he also had this conversation, a lot of the enabling of your character, the protagonist or the antagonist in King's books has a manifestation of somebody enabling him. Mm-hmm. And I love that bathroom scene. It's so Stephen King of the Reaper, like, go ahead, do it, man.
Yeah.
Do it. Yeah, kill yourself.
Yeah.
Which is very much, I love when he does that. It's almost like, I'll say it again, a manifestation is enabling him. You have in The Shining, these ghosts are enabling Jack Torrance or something like that. You have the manifestation of it. That could be anything that you fear.
Yeah. It's almost like in King's work, and then fluidly through Garris's direction, there is no angel on your left shoulder. There's only the devil on your right.
Yeah.
And you're just, and it's whether or not he chooses to open his mouth and tell you. Because so rarely we don't have characters that tell you to do the good things. And even Alan's character has this internal monologue that keeps showing up to tell him the worst things. He doesn't guide him. He basically warns him, like, oh, this guy's dead, or this guy's got crotches, you can't trust them, like. And I think all the people he sees on this journey are like, it reminded me so much of Odysseus on his way home in the Odyssey, in that it's not about this one singular moment, it's the hero's journey. As he gets with each one of these people, he experiences a different kind of horror.
And then when Odysseus gets home, he still has all these suitors.
Yeah. And in this case, Parker gets home and he comes across basically the most hard horror of all, which is the mental and emotional horror of the toll of this event.
Yeah. Interesting part of this writing is him exercising all the scenarios and possible outcomes and how you're going to handle it. The doctor come on, your mom died.
Yeah.
And then they put it in the movie. All these scenarios that go through his brain.
Yep.
The inner dialogues that a lot of Stephen King books have.
Yeah. And there's the argument that there's too many of those in the film. And I would argue that there are probably a few too many inside the film itself. There's one that repeats at the end where the doctor basically gives him the same information twice. I get that. But I also think, too, that's how my mind works. Is I'm always thinking of the worst possible situation in every single situation. And so I kind of, I find a kinship with Parker. As far as cast goes, David Arquette as George Staub is awesome. I love David Arquette.
I think it's the best part, right? Yeah. I think like David Arquette usually is just an accessory in the movies.
Yeah, he gets his time to shine here, and I think in a way that he doesn't a lot often. So
right, yeah, he didn't really shine in this is like after Scream 2.
Yeah, I think post 3. I think he's done the 3 of them.
Just post Scream 3, where now he can be the headline. He can put his name on the cover and like, oh yeah, I know that guy.
Yeah, and I think this was right about the time that he directed this really cool slasher movie called The Tripper, which was about a guy in a Ronald Reagan mask that was massacring people. He directed this film, and it's a wild movie. One day we'll talk about it. Cliff Robertson's also in there playing the farmer. A really unique character. Because he's kind of just this oddball that you're almost just afraid of who he could be instead of who he is.
So it's a Schroeder's box kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Because he's constantly like peeing his pants, but you don't know if that's part of it just being old or something biologically happened to him, or it's a red flag. Like you better get out of this car or something. Yeah.
This guy reeks of death, and much in the same way he gives that offer. Why don't you and I just keep going and visit your mom? And he makes the choice, you go stay with your brother, I'm going to get out of the car. Like, he makes the correct choice of, like, this isn't the right car to get into. And it's not until he gets into Staub's car that he's unable to get out. That he's forced to ride the bullet.
Yeah.
Nikki Katt also appears as Ferris, the draft-dodging hippie van. Nikki Katt's under a lot of makeup. I didn't realize that was Nikki Katt in the movie.
Yes, it is. Then you get that weird, very much, I don't know, this very much like he's out in the woods and he has to battle nature.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just he's being hunted by this force that's really kind of a car and kind of a ghost and kind of a nothing at the same time. Another person I want to call out because he's only in like the first scene, but Matt Frewer, who appears in the film as Mr. Clarkson, the teacher at the art class at the beginning of the film.
Yeah, he was in the game.
Well, and Matt Frewer and his collaborations amongst the Stephen King world, too.
Oh, right.
Because he was in The Stand playing one of my favorite characters, the Trash Can Man. He also appears in a number of other Stephen King and Mick Garris related stuff. Matt Frewer is one of those guys never got utilized as much as he deserved to be.
No, I think he's been in like episodes of Outer Limits and stuff like that.
Yeah, his claim to fame is probably that he was Max Headroom on that classic 80s series. But he's just never really gotten that kind of level of respect. And the sad thing is, every time he pops into a movie, I know that it's such a bittersweet thing. I'm going to get one scene. He's in the Dawn of the Dead remake, and he shows up. And immediately we find out 2 minutes later, he's been bitten by a zombie. And now they got to put him down.
No.
And it's like,
it's almost
why do you take him?
You don't get enough of him.
Yeah, and I think he was one of the guys in the Watchmen, Zack Snyder's Watchmen film as well, one of like the former villains. Yeah, I really enjoy Matt Frewer, and so it's nice to see him in this film.
Very snotty art teacher too, but you expect that from him.
Yeah. I want to take a moment to talk about kind of how the film was released, because this is a movie that Garris knew he was going to get a very, very small budget for this movie and was going to have to make do with what he could.
I think it was almost under 100. I think it was under $100,000.
Yeah, and you can see that. I mean, he's got Greg Nicotero and his team working on the effects, but the effects are still kind of cheap. The studio that he was working with kept pushing him to add more horror to the film, and something that he actually says, I think they were right to do. I think I needed to add a little bit more.
I don't want to ruin it, but he totally lifted that from The Burning, when you do the head.
Oh, yeah.
And you just cover the head and the head's talking.
Yep.
That's totally from The Burning, but he uses it from
Yeah,
David Arquette in the car accident. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I could see that being definitely lifted from there.
Tom Savini, he totally lifted Tom Savini at the head decapitation, and that's totally lifted from The Burning.
Yeah. And so when the studio got the finished cut of the film, they basically shelved it. I mean, it from what it sounds like, it may have gotten a small run in theaters first, but my first memory of this movie was I heard about it on a Saturday night that the USA Channel on TV was going to air it one night only on a Sunday night.
And they're up all night?
No, it was just Sunday night at 8 p.m.
Oh, this is after Up All Night.
And so my folks and I, we always watch the new Stephen King stuff. I had to scramble together a videotape to tape this on VCR because I knew that I might not get a chance to see this movie again. And it was a heavily cut version. You know, the film opens with a nude scene, but this film opens with a big blur because you're not allowed to see the nudity on USA.
Right.
They cut out all the swear words. They cut out a bunch of the gore. I still found the movie very enticing, but I had to hunt for several years to get a copy of it on DVD. And now, of course, you can stream it on a number of places like Amazon Prime, but it's something where the movie disappeared for a long time. I get why people don't talk about it, because it wasn't made available.
Yeah, I didn't really know this existed until you talked about it last week. We're doing this movie.
Yeah, and so you can see a movie that very much has those Stephen King elements. It's got Night of the Living Dead references and The Haunting references. And The Burning. Like, I think part of that comes down to Mick Garris was a man of the horror people. He developed the series.
It's really interesting that his name is Alan Parker, because that's one of our favorite film directors.
I know,
like
I kept
Jacob
thinking
Ladders.
about that as I was watching it, if it was intentional or not. But, if you're looking for more Mick Garris, check out any of his other Stephen King adaptations, but also check out the 2-season series he did with Showtime, Masters of Horror, where he gathered a bunch of famous filmmakers together, gave them each a budget in 7 days, and said, if you make this movie under budget in 7 days, you have final cut. And he made, there's like 26 episodes that are all really freaking weird.
No, yeah. Stuart Gordon did a fantastic H.P. Lovecraft story into it,
Yep, and Garris also does the show Postmortem, the podcast series. If you're a horror fan, you've got to check out Postmortem. It's a wonderful series. And he usually will bring up Riding the Bullet every couple episodes.
I think he contributed to a little bit of the Edge of Darkness Shudder, right?
Yeah, he was definitely on that. Yeah, and I think he was in a couple other Shudder documentaries. So you've seen him around, even if you don't recognize his face. There's a wonderful biography about him. But I think this is a movie that if you're looking for kind of the purity of what Mick Garris brought from an emotional standpoint.
I would say right. It's the purity of it all.
Yep.
It's very much a Stephen King story. It's a very much a Mick Garris film.
Yeah, and I think it's the most of both of them. Really hitting head on for better and worse, and I think that's what makes the film so fascinating.
Yeah. If you didn't tell me if it's a Stephen King story and I watched it, I would go, this is very much of his kind of template.
Yep. Yeah. So go ahead and check out Riding the Bullet over on Amazon Prime right now, or you can pick up a DVD, I'm sure, for pretty cheap. The movie is kind of hard to find, but also easy to find. So let us know your thoughts on it down below, and what's maybe your most underrated Stephen King adaptation, because he's got some movies that were made that were great, some movies that were made that were terrible, and a few that were kind of lost.
Firestarter. Nobody talks about Firestarter.
The original or the remake?
The original, right?
Okay, because the remake's kind of shit. Anywho, thank you guys for joining us, and you can find all my film reviews over at goatfilmreviews.com.
Yeah, and of course, they're going to have to do a better version of Dark Tower. I would love them to do the first book.
Mike Flanagan's doing it for Amazon.
Really?
It's
the
a
first
series.
book?
He's doing a series. So,
I
think that's the right way to go, because you can't really squeeze a lot of that into movies.
I want to see that orangey little world and him dressed in his Western outfit.
Yeah.
I love it.
Bring us there.
All right, you can find my show, The St. Paul Filmcast, anywhere you find podcasts. And keep the conversation going. What Stephen King adaptation would you do next?
Oh, yeah, because I'm definitely going to pick one myself, but you can help us out by picking another one.
Sorry, we already did The Shining. Yeah, we already did Carrie, too.
Well, we got more. We got
more, right.